You know, while I was working on this review I realized a somewhat funny coincidence. Stars Rural was first mentioned by Twilight back in Lunar Eclipse, the last episode to air before Halloween in 2011. Shadowplay might not be Halloween themed like Lunar Eclipse, but it is the last episode that aired before Halloween in 2017. Not only that, if we consider the Canadian release, then Stars Rural made his first physical appearance in the show exactly 6 years after Lunar Eclipse, and there are 6 elements of harmony and 6 pillars of Equestria. I wonder if that means anything? Shadowplay is a rather odd experiment. So far the TV show and the IDW comics were kept separate. While the comics always tried to stick to the show was never affected by the comics. This changed earlier this year with the so-called From Shadows arc that actually teased Shadowplay back in February, as it deals with Stygian's descendant Shadowlock, who tried to erase all evidence of Stygian's existence from history, even memories. The last page of that story arc even shows Starsfur's journal and a picture of the Pony of Shadows. And then there is of course the Legends of Magic series, which is all about exploring the adventures of the 6 pillars and how Stygian became the Pony of Shadows. However, as of writing this review, the Legend of Magic series hasn't concluded yet and only now gets to the stuff that is actually important for Shadowplay. So while I might do another video on the topic at some point, I think it is for the best to ignore the comics and judge this 2-parter on its own merits. After all, there was at least some build up to this finale in the show itself. Yeah, as it turned out, Campfire Tales, Daring Dan and a half of information were there so we don't have to read the Legends of Magic series. They were basically meant to introduce the pillars so Shadowplay doesn't have to do so. And indeed, the season finale manages to save some valuable time this way. But I think it could have been done better. In fact, the entire first part of Shadowplay feels like they forced about 6 episodes worth of content into 20 minutes that could have been used to introduce the pillars in a more natural manner. The main 6 reclaiming the artifacts of those legendary heroes could have been a series of episodes spread throughout the entire season. Just imagine that Sunburst had discovered the journal in the first episode of season 7 and Twilight would have been occupied trying to translate it, while her friends get episodes traveling to the pillars' homes, learning about them and acquiring the artifacts. Actually, they don't even have to acquire them right away, they only need to know where they are and they can simply get them off screen in Shadowplay, so we don't have to spend the entire first half of the 2-parter to set up the actual plot. A half of information is actually the perfect example of how those episodes should have been like. Fluttershy had an actual reason to learn about Meadowbrook, it shows her similarities, and she learns of Meadowbrook's mask, which seemingly has at least some magical properties. On the other part, Somnambula's story that kinda tacked on in Daring Dan, but at least Meadowbrook and Somnambula got their own episodes, and those episodes still managed to tell their own story. Campfire Tales is not really an episode on its own. It only exists to establish 3 characters for the season finale at once that at first glance have nothing to do with each other. This should have been 3 different episodes. And to make one thing clear, I don't consider this a story arc. While these episodes establish lore and characters for the finale, they are not really connected by a common story thread or theme. There is no build up for Shadowplay, and nothing what happens in those episodes has any bearing on the plot of Shadowplay, other than the fact that we already know who the pillars are. In fact, to change the changeling is more important to the conflict of Shadowplay. Starlight thought that Pharynx was a lost cause, but she learns that there is no thing as a lost cause in that episode, which is why she didn't want to give up on Stygian in Shadowplay. In any case, those episodes still do their job to introduce the pillars, but since the main 6 still have to acquire their artifacts, the actual plot of Shadowplay doesn't kick in until the second episode of this 2-parter. The Pony of Shadows is unleashed. They have to find a way to defeat him. The main 6 befriends pillars, Twilight having a conflict with her idol, who is not quite like she imagined, and so on. That is far too much to deal with in just 20 minutes, not to mention that there are way too many characters. There are of course the main 6, the 6 pillars, Dalek, Sunburst, Spike and Stygian. That are 16 major characters, and that's not counting Celestia and Luna, whose absence makes little sense. You would think that Twilight would immediately report to them what happened after they brought back the pillars, and that it might be a good idea to inform them that they accidentally unleashed an ancient evil while doing so. Just saying, having 2 more alicorns might have been helpful. Now admittedly this episode handled it somewhat decent, all things considered. Since the pillars were already introduced in prior episodes, there was no need to focus on each of them individually, so it didn't hurt so much that 5 of them were pushed into the background alongside most of the main 6. They exactly did as much as they needed to do, and they still managed to give them a couple of funny moments as well. Focusing more on the conflict between Starstore and Twilight was probably the best way to handle the story. In general, this is a great idea. Twilight finally brings back her idol, but he's more enraged than pleased as she also unleashed the Pony of Shadows. Twilight wants to help to fix that mistake, but Starstore is dismissive of her and Twilight has to win his trust first. However, this conflict is cut short rather quickly when Somnambula points out that Twilight's plan could work. In theory then, this episode should have been about the difference in ideals, as Starstore wants to banish the villain. Here, it should have been up to Twilight to go against him, insisting that they should try to save Stygian first, but instead Starlight takes over this part. This conflict should have been about Twilight and Starstore, especially when he explains to Celestia in the end that he learned a lot from Twilight. Even though she never challenged his opinion throughout the episode until she sees Stygian inside of the Pony of Shadows. I like Starlight and I still think that she is a great addition to the show in general, but in this season finale it feels like she plays half the role Twilight was supposed to play. Starlight is the one who challenges Starstore. Twilight is only caught between the two, and I think that overall cheapens the conflict. Frankly, I think this episode would have been better off if Starlight wasn't in it. She could have served more as a conscience to Twilight. Twilight should have been more torn between listening to Starlight and going alongside with Starstore's plan. I think they were trying to go for that, but Twilight never tried to defend Starlight's opinion. Though I should probably mention that Starstore himself is probably my favorite thing about this episode. I only was a bit disappointed that he wasn't voiced by Patrick Stewart, but I digress. His personality is rather fitting, and it is a nice callback to Magical Mystery Cure, in which Celestia said that he never understood friendship like Twilight. So it makes perfectly sense that he's a bit more pragmatic and rude. It does bother me a bit that he is portrayed as a strawman concerning the whole redemption thing, but finally seeing him was awesome. However, the one character who suffers the most from his lack of screen time is the Pony of Shadows. Hands down, he is perhaps the worst villain the show has introduced so far. To begin with, his character is based on an urban legend mentioned in Castlevania. An urban legend that was never supposed to be taken seriously, and the hint that he might exist after or at the end of that episode was pretty much just a punchline that didn't mean anything. So right off the bat, we have a villain that was only supposed to be a joke. Now, I won't deny that people wanted to know more about him after said stinger. The thing is that Shadowplay also makes it clear that the Pony of Shadows we saw at the end of Castlevania can't be the same one we see in this episode, making this a rather moot point. Now, to be fair, Starstore originally was nothing more than a joke in Lunar Eclipse, so it is admittedly somewhat clever that they appear together. Then there's of course the fact that nothing is really original about him. His shadow powers are very reminiscent of King Sombra, and Stygian's motivation that he wants people to recognize his hard work is pretty much copy-pasted from Luna. Not only that, his goal, Eternal Darkness, sounds very similar to Nightmare Moon's Eternal Night. Now, of course, these two are not exactly the same thing. Eternal Darkness is obviously much more extreme. However, the core difference is that Nightmare Moon wants to force everyone to appreciate her, while the Pony of Shadows pretty much wants to avenge the fact that no one appreciates him. Yet, it is really hard to ignore these similarities. Also, is it just me or does his design resemble an evil changeling? Not to mention that all his talk of darkness and the name Pony of Shadows is rather generic. I heard more inspired talk about darkness in Kingdom Hearts. And now that I think about it, he does look a lot like a Heartless. In any case, besides the fact that he appears like an uninspired Sombra knockoff, what makes it even worse is that for all the talk how powerful he is, He never appears to be an actual threat. He doesn't even get to take out the princesses. In fact, he doesn't do anything other than destroying Pwnhenge. A forgotten ruin no one cares about anyway. As soon as he appears, he gets overpowered by Twilight and Starlight, forcing him to retreat. Now it is justified as he, like Starsorrel, is in a weakened state after his banishment, but after that he just disappears for most of the episode, and in the final confrontation when he's supposedly at his full power, he gets no chance to show it off, as there's nothing he can do against the combined power of the Elements of Harmony and the Pillars of Equestria. There is no tension. A villain that has no hope to win is simply not that interesting. Even Sombra, who hardly got any screen time in the Crystal Empire and has no personality to speak of, left a greater impression, simply because he was established as an actual threat. First, he blocks Shining Armor's ability to cast magic, and then it is revealed that it's only a matter of time until he breaks through Caden's shield. So Twilight has to find the Crystal Heart before this happens. There is tension because we know if Twilight cannot accomplish her task in time, everyone in the Crystal Empire is doomed. But here it never seems like the main six and the pillars could fail. The defeat of the Pony of Shadows is unavoidable. Admittedly, the actual conflict is not about if he can be defeated or not, but rather if Stygian can be saved from the shadow. But there is no real reason for the audience to care about Stygian until the last minute, in which it is revealed that the shadow is actually another entity that bonded to Stygian like Venom bonded to Eddie Brooks. This makes his snapshot redemption at least more believable than most, as Stygian never really did anything outright bad. Him trying to copy the artifacts of the pillars without their permission was obviously wrong, and the pillars had good reason to be angry with him, even if they were wrong about his intentions, but it was hardly irredeemable. Everything he did as a Pony of Shadows cannot be entirely blamed on him, as the Shadows seemingly had some control over him and probably amplified his negative emotions. So in this case it was less a snapshot redemption like in Starlight's case, and more like an exorcism. Also random thought, before they mentioned his name, I assumed that Stygian is actually Clover the Clever, you know, that unicorn from the half-forming Eve play that was also a student of Starsorrel. Frankly, I think that would have been a much better story. The conflict between Clover and Starsorrel would have been much more personal, not to mention that it was Clover, Smart Cookie and Private Pansy embracing friendship would save Equestria from the Wendigos, so there would have been a rather nice dramatic irony in play if Clover was the one to turn evil. And I think it would have been easier to care about his redemption than Stygian's because of that. But back on track, one thing I actually somewhat liked about Stygian is that he serves as a foil to Sunburst, a scholar of great knowledge but self-esteem issues as he has no remarkable powers. Sadly, this episode doesn't do anything with it, as Sunburst is just kinda there for the most part, even though he is the one who kickstarts the plot in the first place. I would either have expanded Sunburst's role in this two-parter and highlight their similarities, or cut him out completely, because let's face it, Starsorrel's journal could have been discovered by Starlight or Twilight just as well. And now to what is probably the worst part of this episode. The Elements of Harmony. Shadowplay completely undermined the ending of Princess Twilight Sparkle. It was meant to be a big sacrifice that they have to return them to the Tree of Harmony, only for this episode to reveal that they can remove them anytime they want and use them as they please. Unless they want to use a banishing spell, which apparently burns their entire energy. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Celestia use a banishment spell to send Luna to the moon? Now admittedly, if there were actually some consequences to removing them from the tree and using them like the episode taught us at first, if they actually had lost their elements for real this time, I would let it slide. But then it is revealed in the end that they are fine because they use them for healing magic. So what stops the main six from using them as soon as the next baddie shows up? You see the can of worms is opened? I can't wait for the next season finale to completely ignore this obvious solution. Of course, I did like the fact that we learned about the origins of the Elements of Harmony. I like it when the show expands on already established lore, but I think it was rather unnecessary. The Tree of Harmony was enough of an explanation already. There was no need to dig deeper, instead it only opens up more questions. For example, why are the artifacts of the pillars magical to begin with? And so on. Not to mention that there are several smaller problems. For example, in part 1, right at the beginning, when they tried to figure out what happened to Starthrill and the other pillars, they said they had to do research, but the answers were in Starthrill's journal all along, making the entire scene rather pointless. They could have skipped the entire research scene and go to Pwnage right away, as Twilight immediately knew what Pwnage is. The justification that Starthrill's hoofwriting is so bad doesn't really hold up, considering that Sam Basingly had no trouble to read his journal before, not to mention that both he and Twilight already read multiple books written by Starthrill. Not only that, the introduction of ancient Pwnage comes with a whole new set of problems. Starlight obviously can't speak it, so how was she able to alter Starthrill's time travel spell in season 5? I can only assume that it was also written in ancient Pwnage. Not only that, ancient Pwnage is very much a different language. So why do the pillars of Equestria talk in modern Pwnage? I know this one is a little bit nitpicky, but they simply shouldn't have brought it up. And then there are some problems in part 1 with the scenes in which the main six acquire the pillars' artifacts. First question, who brought them back to the pillars' home? Besides that, the rarity scene is just plain bad. I know that they were going for that whole inner beauty thing, but that doesn't work. All this scene shows is that no one bothered to do gardening in the last 1000 years, which is rather stupid. Also, Rainbow Dash tricking Garbett to get the sheet seems somewhat out of character for her. It is obviously meant to mirror Flash's smartness trickery we saw in Campfire Tales. But I simply can't see Rainbow Dash turning down a challenge like that. Okay, this one can be somewhat justified, as Rainbow Dash obviously has enough reason to assume that Garbett won't hand over the shield even if she beats him in the race, but it still seems a bit odd. And last but not least, I honestly think that they tried to force too much fan service down our throat at once, explaining where the elements came from. The Pony of Shadows, Starthrill the Bearded, and even the Dazzlings made a cameo. So I guess the Fiendship is Magic issue in which Starthrill invented heavy metal and hip-hop to fight them is not canon anymore. I liked all these elements individually, but it feels like they were trying to pander as much to the fanbase as possible. But I guess I should wrap things up. When I first watched Shadowplay, I enjoyed it a lot, but then I thought about what I really liked about it. I like that it explores the lore of MLP. It was awesome to finally see Starthrill in person, and I especially like that people can't claim anymore that Equestria Girls is non-canon. Really, that started to annoy me. But the story itself, or rather its execution, is rather lacking. The first half did what other shows would do throughout an entire season, and the second half felt rather rushed as a result. There's hardly any tension, and this episode completely undid the ending of Princess Twilight Sparkle. Did I enjoy this episode? Yes, a lot actually, but I cannot exactly call this a good season finale. I do think that this story could have worked if it had more time, but time constraints are something that have to be accounted for. If your story is too long for 40 minutes, you have to make it fit somehow, and this two-parter failed to do so. It feels like fanservice was more important than a coherent story. Now I imagine that the Legends of Magic series will fix some issues I have with this two-parter, especially concerning Stygian's weak characterization, but I shouldn't be required to read them. But what about you? Did you like Shadowplay? Anything that bothered you? What do you think of Starthrill? Let me know in the comments. Also, please consider to subscribe and check out my Patreon. I am Tricky Fox. Stay foxy.